I was standing in the courthouse parking lot, watching complete strangers raise their hands to bid on the place I once called home. 15,000, going once, the auctioneer's voice echoed sharply against the cold concrete walls. How in the world had things spiraled to this point? It all traced back to my HOA president, Karen Whitmore. The same woman who had personally signed off on the window replacements for my house suddenly decided those windows were illegal. From that moment, she set out to dismantle my life piece by piece, all over renovations I had written authorization for. But here's the mistake Karen made: she didn't realize that I document everything. Every petty threat. Every fabricated violation. Every lie told in those miserable HOA meetings. Fast forward 5 years. I wasn't broke or homeless. Instead, I was holding a settlement check for $75,000, and whose name was scrawled across the bottom. None other than Karen Whitmore herself. She had no clue what kind of storm she unleashed when she picked a fight with the wrong person, an electrician who keeps records like evidence. So tell me, what would you do if your HOA tried to take your home over renovations they themselves approved? Drop your answer in the comments, and let me know where you're tuning in from. I want to see how far this story can travel. My name's Marcus Ricks, 52 years old, a union electrician. And all my life, I thought I understood power. Turns out, the real power doesn't come from high-voltage lines, it comes from a clipboard wielded by someone with a mean streak and an inflated sense of authority. After my divorce, my priority was finding a stable place where my daughter, Emma, could spend weekends. She was 16 at the time, and already navigating enough emotional chaos without her dad dragging her into more instability. That's what led me to Willowbrook Estates. On the surface, it was perfect. Quiet cul-de-sacs, kids riding bikes, families grilling in backyards as the smell of barbecue carried through warm summer evenings. The house I bought needed plenty of work, but fixing houses was my specialty. The first thing that had to go were the original 1973 windows. They were single-pane aluminum frames, flimsy as tin foil, and they practically shoveled cold air into the house every winter. I'd done my research for months. Double-pane vinyl replacements were energy efficient, cost-saving, and in a style that blended with the neighborhood's historic look. That's when I made my first and biggest mistake: I trusted the system. I submitted an architectural request just like the HOA handbook told me to. Photos, measurements, contractor licenses, permits, the full package. By their own bylaws, they had 30 days to reply. On day 28, I received the letter, approved. Clear as day. Signed by the architectural committee. Professional installation, city permits, inspections, everything by the book. When those new windows were finally put in, they looked incredible. And better yet, my heating bill dropped in half. For about 2 weeks, I felt like I'd won the homeowner's lottery. That illusion ended the day Karen Whitmore decided to target me. Karen was the president of our HOA, and she ran Willowbrook like her personal empire. Real estate agent by trade, control freak by nature. The type who got genuine enjoyment out of seeing her neighbors squirm. Picture this: blonde bob haircut stiff like a helmet, a leather portfolio clutched like a shield, and a smile so cold it could have frozen fire. The first strike came while I was grilling burgers for Emma one evening. My phone buzzed with a call. "Mr. Ricks," Karen's voice snapped, "your unauthorized modifications are unacceptable." I frowned. "Karen, I have written approval." Approval was conditional, she shot back, pending final board review. I looked at my approval letter again. No conditions. No fine print. Nothing. Where does it say that? I asked. Click. She hung up. The deadline for compliance, Tuesday. That night, I walked into the community center holding my approval letter like a shield and my confidence like armor. Big mistake. The room reeked of burned coffee and the stale air of failed dreams. Karen sat at the head of a folding table like a judge in a war crimes tribunal. "Your window installation violates community standards," she announced coldly, sliding a violation notice across the table as if she were passing me a death warrant. I raised my letter for everyone to see. "You already approved this." "Approval does not guarantee compliance," she snapped, scribbling on another form with the glee of someone tasting revenge. "You're fined $500. Payable within 30 days. $500. For following their own rules." I looked around at my neighbors for support, but not a single pair of eyes met mine. Every face turned away. The silence pressed down heavier than the fine itself. That was the moment it hit me: Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was making an example out of me. And in the fine print, I spotted the real trap: fines double monthly until resolved. That night, I spread all my HOA documents across the kitchen table, tracing the financial nightmare she'd engineered. Month 1, $500. Month 2, $1,000. Month 3, $2,000. It didn't take a math genius to see my budget wouldn't survive. Lawyers wanted $5,000 upfront just to touch the case. Either way, I was staring at financial suicide. Pay Karen's extortion or pay attorneys to fight her. But Karen overlooked something important: I'm an electrician. And electricians don't stop at the first sign of a short. We trace every wire until we find the fault. And soon, I was about to discover Karen Whitmore had been shorting the entire neighborhood. The real kicker came when I decided to drive around the neighborhood just to clear my head. As I circled through the streets of Willowbrook, something didn't add up. I counted 47 homes. Yes, I wrote down every single one, with the exact same vinyl windows I had installed. Same brand, same style, same everything. Not one of those houses had a violation notice taped to their door. Not one had fines piling up like mine. That's when I realized, Karen wasn't enforcing community standards. She was running a selective game, and I had just become her target. The question clawed at me: why me? Why was I singled out when nearly 4 dozen of my neighbors had done the same thing? I didn't know it yet, but the answer would change everything. Karen's retaliation hit fast and merciless. 2 weeks after I embarrassed her at that HOA meeting, a certified letter landed in my mailbox like a snake waiting to strike. Property lien notice, $2,000. My hands shook as I read the breakdown. That original $500 fine had mutated into some kind of financial beast. Late fees, administrative costs, enforcement expenses, every line item designed to bleed me dry. And then I saw the dagger: failure to satisfy lien may result in foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. Over windows she herself had approved. That night, I called my neighbor, Janet Bennett. She was 73, kept the most beautiful garden in the subdivision, and was one of the only people who still smiled when I walked by. When she picked up, her voice trembled. "Oh, Marcus, I was hoping you'd call. Karen stopped by yesterday asking questions about you. Whether you seemed financially stable, if Emma stayed with you often, if your property looked well kept." She paused, the silence tight like a held breath. "Marcus, she's building a case against you." My chest tightened. Karen wasn't just slapping me with fines. She was digging into my personal life. And then Janet dropped the revelation that turned my suspicion into certainty. She did the same thing to me last year. Said my garden gnomes violated aesthetic standards. I'm 73, Marcus. I didn't have the fight in me. I moved them just to keep the peace. Her voice cracked. That was it. That was Karen's pattern. She preyed on people she thought couldn't or wouldn't fight back. After I hung up, I stayed awake the entire night, eyes burning from the glow of my laptop as I combed through Ohio property laws. And then I stumbled across something that made me sit straight up. Back in trade school, one of my instructors drilled a phrase into us: know the code before you run the wire. It applied here too. HOA liens weren't free-for-alls. They had to follow legal procedure, proper notice, a 30-day cure period, all filed by the book. Karen hadn't done that. She jumped straight to the lien. Her entire weapon was built on sand, and she was gambling on me not knowing better. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The place smelled of mildew and dust, like a warehouse for forgotten lives. I spent hours digging through files, and finally, I found it, Karen's lien paperwork. And she'd botched it. Badly. 3 legally required documents missing. She had cut corners, thinking a blue-collar electrician wouldn't recognize legal codes. Big mistake. I photocopied everything, filed a formal challenge, and walked out of that courthouse buzzing like a live wire. It was my first real victory. But if I thought that would slow Karen down, I was dead wrong. Within days, she called an emergency HOA board meeting to clarify window policies. I knew what that meant. She was moving the goalposts. The community center smelled of that same bitter coffee, but this time the air felt charged with her desperation. Reading from a script, Karen declared, "The board has determined that previous approvals were issued in error. All non-conforming windows must be replaced within 60 days." I stood up, my work boots echoing on the linoleum. "You can't change approvals retroactively, Karen. That's breach of contract." Her eyes narrowed. "Mr. Hicks, you're out of order." "No," I shot back, holding up my research like a shield. "You're out of line. Your lien is invalid. You never provided proper legal notice under state law." Her face went white, then red, then a shade of purple I didn't know skin could turn. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked. But the damage was already done. I had humiliated her in front of the very board members she relied on. And if Karen hated anything, it was losing control. Her retaliation escalated immediately. A collections agency out of Columbus started calling me non-stop. "Mr. Hicks, you owe $2,400. If you don't pay, we can garnish your wages and seize your accounts." I gritted my teeth. "That lien is invalid." I filed a legal challenge. "Our client says otherwise," they sneered. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Emma noticed the shadows under my eyes during one of her weekend visits. "Dad, you look exhausted. What's going on? How do you explain to your 16-year-old that the neighborhood bully is trying to steal your house?" I pulled her into a hug instead. "Just some boring adult stuff, sweetheart." That's when my obsession began. I turned the spare bedroom into a command center. One wall became a timeline of every letter, every fine, every phone call. Another wall plastered with photos of other houses' windows. If Karen wanted to play games, I was going to learn the rules better than she did. And then I saw it. The breakthrough. Every single homeowner she targeted had something in common. They were either renters, minorities, or working class like me. Meanwhile, her friends, the country club set, got friendly reminders instead of fines. Karen wasn't enforcing standards. She was discriminating. And I was about to prove it. Karen's next move was nuclear. She brought in a high-priced HOA attorney from Columbus, the kind of lawyer whose letterhead probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. The letter came crisp and cream-colored, every word dripping with intimidation. Notice of intent to foreclose. You have 30 days to satisfy all obligations or face sheriff's sale. A sheriff's sale. The words rattled me to my core, like grabbing a live wire without gloves. That weekend, instead of tracing circuits, I grabbed my tape measure and camera. I wasn't looking for electrical shorts this time. I was documenting discrimination. House by house, block by block, I walked through Willowbrook, photographing windows. The crunch of autumn leaves under my boots sounded louder than usual, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. What I found made my stomach twist. 47 homes with windows identical to mine. Same brand. Same installer. Some even installed the very same month. Take Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street. Her husband was the bank president. They had my exact windows, yet the HOA minutes praised her for her community-minded improvements. Just 3 streets over, Carlos Martinez, a mechanic who rented instead of owned, got slapped with violation after violation. His only crime was not fitting Karen's image of an acceptable neighbor. Same windows. Same rules. Different treatment. Back in my command center, I plastered the photos on the walls. Blue pins for Karen's friends who got warnings. Red pins for people like me who got fines. The pattern was undeniable. Karen was running a discrimination racket under the guise of community standards. Then the phone rang. It was Janet Bennett, her voice hushed like she was afraid Karen might overhear. Marcus. I found something you need to see. Can you come over? Quietly. Her kitchen smelled of jasmine tea and decades of careful restraint. With trembling hands, she passed me a manila folder. Her eyes darted nervously toward the window. I kept everything from my fight with her last year. I thought maybe one day, someone braver than me might need it. Inside that folder was dynamite disguised as paperwork. Email exchanges between Karen and the board. Lines that would make a civil rights lawyer dance with joy. One message froze my breath: we need to be strategic about enforcement. Target renters and blue-collar types first. They're less likely to fight back. I looked up at Janet, stunned. This is blatant discrimination. Why didn't you fight this? Her weathered hands smoothed the folder shut. Because I'm a 73-year-old Chinese widow, Marcus. Who would have believed me? Karen runs this neighborhood like her own empire. That night, I dug into fair housing law until my eyes blurred. And there it was, selective enforcement based on race or economic class wasn't just unfair, it was a federal crime. Karen hadn't just been a tyrant with too much free time. She was running an illegal discrimination scheme. The next morning, my hands shook as I dialed the number for Ohio legal aid. When I explained my evidence, the intake specialist's voice sharpened instantly. Sir, if you can document a pattern, this isn't just an HOA dispute. This is a federal fair housing case. How much evidence do you have? 3 boxes. Photos, timelines, 5 years of records. Hold everything. Don't speak to anyone. We're assigning you an attorney immediately. 2 days later, I sat across from Sarah Martinez, a lawyer whose presence filled the conference room like floodlights. The smell of fresh coffee hung in the air, but it was the possibility in that room that made me feel awake. She spread my photos across the table, her eyes sparking with every new piece of proof. Marcus, this is textbook discrimination. Selective enforcement. Economic profiling. Racial targeting. Karen violated at least half a dozen federal statutes. I swallowed. So I wasn't overreacting. Sarah leaned in, tapping my carefully built timeline. She made one fatal mistake. What's that? She picked an electrician to bully. Electricians know how to trace every wire to its source. You didn't just catch isolated violations, you mapped out her entire corrupt system. But Karen wasn't ready to surrender. Not by a long shot. Her lawyer filed for expedited foreclosure, claiming I posed an imminent risk to the community. The emergency hearing was set for Friday, just 4 days away. Thursday night, Emma found me buried in legal briefs and empty coffee cups. Her 16-year-old eyes, sharper than I gave her credit for, scanned my face. Dad, you look terrified. Is someone really trying to take our house? I pulled her close, breathing in the faint strawberry scent of her shampoo. Remember that kid Tyler, who kept stealing your lunch money until you told the principal? She nodded. Yeah. He got suspended. Sometimes bullies don't stop until someone forces them. Karen's been stealing lunch money for years. Tomorrow, I'm telling the principal. Emma squeezed my hand. Good. Tyler needed that lesson too. Friday morning dawned gray and cold. My heart pounded as I carried 3 boxes of evidence into the courthouse. Across the hallway, Karen stood tall beside her attorney, her smirk radiating confidence. She thought she was fighting a tired electrician. She had no idea she was about to face a federal discrimination case. The courtroom was icy cold, but sweat still ran down my back as Judge Patricia Morrison flipped through the case files. Across the aisle, Karen sat stiff as a statue, her expensive attorney whispering confidently at her side. She radiated the smugness of someone who'd never lost to a working-class neighbor. She was about to learn that confidence isn't competence. Your Honor, Karen's attorney began, his voice smooth as polished marble. Mr. Hicks has been in violation of community covenants for 18 months. The HOA has shown remarkable patience, but his ongoing defiance threatens the stability of the neighborhood. Remarkable patience. The phrase nearly made me laugh out loud. Then Sarah Martinez rose, slow and deliberate, like a gunslinger stepping into a duel. She adjusted her blazer, her expression razor-sharp. Your Honor, she said calmly, we are filing a federal fair housing counterclaim. The evidence demonstrates systematic discrimination targeting minority residents and working-class families. Karen's attorney blinked, his composure cracking. This wasn't the simple foreclosure battle he had prepared for. Sarah opened the first evidence box and began laying out documents like a winning poker hand. We have 5 years of documented selective enforcement. Identical violations ignored for residents connected to the HOA president, while minorities and blue-collar homeowners were aggressively targeted. Judge Morrison's brows shot up. Karen's attorney went pale. The courtroom atmosphere shifted from routine foreclosure hearing to federal case explosion. And then Sarah dropped the bomb. Your Honor, we also have internal HOA emails explicitly instructing board members to target renters and working-class families first, because they were less likely to afford legal defense. She read the line aloud. The words echoed through the courtroom, target renters and blue-collar types first. They're less likely to have the resources to fight back. The silence was so thick you could hear the court reporter's fingers freeze mid-keystroke. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Across the aisle, Karen's face shifted from confusion to panic to a barely restrained fury. She hissed into her lawyer's ear, but the damage was already spreading like sparks through dry wiring. Sarah pressed on. Your Honor, 47 homes in Willowbrook Estates have the same vinyl windows as my client. 0 violations were issued to residents connected to Ms. Whitmore. 100% of violations were issued against minorities, renters, and working-class families. The judge called a 30-minute recess. Karen's lawyer spent every second pacing and talking frantically on his phone, probably trying to figure out how to put out a 5-alarm fire with a garden hose. When court resumed, Judge Morrison's tone was entirely different. This court is deeply troubled by allegations of discriminatory enforcement. Mr. Hendricks, your foreclosure case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into HOA practices and referring this matter to the federal prosecutor's office. Karen's smug facade melted. This wasn't just about my house anymore. Federal prosecutors meant criminal charges. Criminal charges meant prison. Walking out of that courthouse felt like breathing fresh air after years of choking on smoke. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. The harassment campaign shifted into overdrive. Within a week, city inspectors were knocking on my door with anonymous complaints about unlicensed electrical work in my home. 3 inspections in 2 weeks. Nothing ever found, but plenty of time lost. Parking tickets began showing up on my windshield even when I was legally parked. My truck suddenly became a commercial vehicle, in violation of residential zoning, though I'd parked it in the same driveway for years. Then came the phone calls. Hang-ups. Heavy breathing. Muted voices growling threats. Drop the lawsuit or you'll regret it. Classic intimidation tactics. Maybe they would have worked on someone else. But I had 3 boxes of evidence, a lawyer who smelled blood, and a teenage daughter who believed in me. And then Karen crossed the line. Emma called me from school, her voice trembling. "Dad, someone told my guidance counselor they're worried about my home life. That you're neglecting me because of your legal problems. They dragged my 16-year-old into their war." That night, I sat in my evidence room surrounded by 5 years of Karen's corruption. Phone logs. Violation notices. Emails. Patterns of fines and foreclosures. And buried in those records, I found something that made my blood boil. Property tax documents revealed Karen owned 3 rental houses in Willowbrook through an LLC called KW Holdings. 3 houses she never disclosed to the HOA board, despite conflict of interest rules. And guess what? Those rental properties had the exact same vinyl windows she had fined me for. Identical, same manufacturer, same style, installed by the same contractor. Karen wasn't just targeting people she didn't like. She was deliberately ignoring violations on her own properties. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about discrimination. It was about money. Karen had been manipulating property values to benefit her personal real estate empire. By selectively enforcing rules, she lowered property values, bought homes at steep discounts, and flipped them for profit. The scope of her corruption was staggering. I picked up the phone and called Sarah Martinez. "Sarah," I said, my voice shaking, "I found the smoking gun." "What is it?" "Karen owns rental properties here. Properties with the exact same windows she fined me for. She's been using the HOA to rig the market for her own investment company." Silence stretched on the other end. Then Sarah spoke, her voice low and steady. "Marcus, you just turned this from a discrimination case into a federal RICO investigation." Karen thought she was bullying one electrician. She had no idea she had just awakened a federal task force. 3 weeks after the federal referral, I was sitting in my evidence room at midnight, surrounded by stacks of papers and half-empty coffee cups, when the last pieces finally clicked into place. Sometimes the biggest discoveries happen when you aren't even looking for them. Like tracing a short circuit in the last corner of a breaker box, I found Karen's trail where nobody thought to check. I had been digging through 5 years of county property records, cross-referencing HOA board decisions with real estate transactions. My printer worked overtime, spitting out deed transfers, tax assessments, and sale histories while the smell of burnt coffee filled the room. That's when I uncovered the shell company. KW Holdings LLC. Registered in Delaware. 3 properties in Willowbrook estates purchased over the past 4 years. Registered agent: Kevin Whitmore, Karen's husband. But the real shock wasn't the ownership, it was the timing. Every single property had been acquired within 6 months of massive HOA violations. The Martinez family on Oak Street. Carlos got hammered with window violations, deck citations, landscaping complaints. After months of fines and stress, his family sold well below market value. KW Holdings swooped in with a cash offer 20% under asking price. The Thompsons on Pine Street. An elderly couple who had lived there for decades. Karen buried them in violations for fence height, shed placement, even Christmas decorations. After a year and a half of harassment, they sold cheap just to escape foreclosure threats. KW Holdings grabbed it immediately. And Janet Bennett's late husband's property? Karen claimed his garage tools violated residential use standards. The fines piled up until Janet's daughter convinced her to sell and move into assisted living. Guess who bought it? KW Holdings. Each time, Karen's signature was on the violation notices that drove her neighbors into despair, and each time, her family's company scooped up the property at a bargain. Then came the most damning discovery. 2847, Maple Street. Purchased by KW Holdings for $43,000 below market value. The listing photos showed the exact same vinyl windows I had been fined for, not just similar, but identical. Same grid pattern. Same manufacturer. Same contractor. Karen had been collecting rent on a property with the very windows she was trying to foreclose my house over. But it went deeper. The violation history told the whole story. The previous owners, the Patels, had been cited 3 years earlier for non-conforming windows. Fines escalated, $500, $1,000, $2,000, until foreclosure loomed. Rather than lose everything, the Patels sold cheap to the only buyer offering cash. KW Holdings. Karen had signed every notice. Every fine escalation. Every board decision that drove them into panic. Then I found the insurance claim. 6 months after buying the Patel property, KW Holdings filed a homeowner's insurance claim for storm damage to those exact windows, the same windows Karen said violated HOA rules. They pocketed $8,000 from the claim. My hands trembled as I read the file. This wasn't rule enforcement. This was a protection racket. Karen created violations, drove down values, bought cheap, then profited on the back end. Over 4 years, KW Holdings had acquired more than $400,000 worth of property at 60 cents on the dollar, pocketing nearly $160,000 in equity, plus rental income. Every victim shared the same profile: elderly, minority, renters, or working class. The people least likely to have money for lawyers. And to make it worse, Karen had been the listing agent for 2 of those distressed sales. She collected commissions on homes she herself devalued through her HOA witch hunt. Then I uncovered the email that tied everything together. In the county's electronic system, Karen had filed a complaint about declining property values due to non-conforming improvements the same month KW Holdings bought the Martinez house. She literally cited her own harassment as justification for buying low. Federal investigators love patterns, and Karen had laid out a 5-year criminal playbook for them. Racketeering. Mail fraud. Wire fraud. Housing discrimination. Conflict of interest. She had violated enough federal laws to fill a prison cell block. I called Sarah Martinez at 6 in the morning, unable to wait. "Sarah, I found the motherlode." "What is it?" "Karen's been running a real estate scam using her HOA power. We're not just talking about discrimination anymore." Sarah's tone sharpened. "What are we talking about?" 5 years. $500,000. A criminal conspiracy. She exhaled slowly. Marcus. Karen thought she was collecting rent checks. What she was actually collecting was federal evidence. The next day, Sarah summoned me to her office for an emergency strategy session. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and justice. She spread my documents across a massive oak table, her eyes blazing with focus. "Marcus, what you've uncovered isn't just HOA abuse. It's organized crime. Karen has been running a racketeering operation under the cover of neighborhood enforcement." Within hours, Sarah had assembled what looked like a legal strike team. Rebecca Bennett, forensic accountant, an expert in financial fraud who practically lived for spreadsheets. David Rodriguez, a federal housing discrimination specialist with years of civil rights cases under his belt. And the big gun, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, a federal prosecutor known for taking down public corruption cases. The plan was meticulous, like watching master electricians draft a wiring diagram for a skyscraper. Every circuit mapped. Every connection traced. Every weak point identified. Sarah pointed to the timeline that now stretched across an entire wall. Federal RICO charges require proving a pattern of criminal activity. We've got 5 years of systematic property manipulation. That's our pattern. Rebecca chimed in, flipping through spreadsheets with a satisfied grin. The money trail is almost too easy. Karen and Kevin use the same bank account for HOA fees and property purchases. Every acquisition lines up perfectly with violation notices. But evidence alone wasn't enough. We needed witnesses. People Karen had driven away. That's when Janet Bennett became our secret weapon. Despite her fear, she had kept meticulous records of every harassment campaign. Even better, she had maintained friendships with families Karen had forced out. The Patels moved to Toledo, Janet whispered at her kitchen table. Maria Santos went back to Puerto Rico. The Johnsons are in Kentucky. But they all kept paperwork. They all knew something wasn't right. Over the next week, I tracked them down one by one. Each phone call was like ripping open an old wound. The Patels wept when I told them their nightmare wasn't random. We lost everything, Mr. Patel said softly. 40 years of savings, gone. We thought it was just bad luck. It wasn't bad luck. It was Karen. And now, we had the proof to bring her entire empire down. David Rodriguez, our housing expert, dug into the enforcement history like a surgeon with a scalpel. He analyzed every violation issued over the past 8 years. The statistics he uncovered were devastating. 93% of major violations targeted minorities or working-class families. Not a single citation against Karen's country club friends or real estate colleagues. Karen didn't just discriminate, David explained, tapping the charts. She weaponized discrimination for profit. That moves this from civil rights violation to criminal conspiracy. Meanwhile, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh coordinated directly with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. She revealed that Karen's shady operation had already triggered multiple red flags in federal databases, suspicious property transfers flagged as possible wire fraud, HOA violation letters tied to mail fraud alerts, and cash transactions that violated banking disclosure rules. She's been on our radar for 6 months, Walsh admitted, flipping through the files. But your case, Marcus, provides the missing piece, intent and systematic operation. We can finally nail her. The scope of our investigation quickly outgrew my spare bedroom. My garage became the war room. Long folding tables were covered with timelines, property records, financial statements, and testimony transcripts. It looked more like a crime lab than a suburban garage. Emma helped after school. At 16, she had a knack for detail I didn't expect. She cross-checked dates, highlighted contradictions, and caught errors even our attorneys missed. Dad, she said one evening, highlighter in hand, Karen's like a really evil landlord. She creates her own slums, then buys them up. I smiled grimly. That's exactly what she's doing, sweetheart. The most satisfying moment came when we tracked down Karen's real estate license history. Sure enough, she had been disciplined back in 2018 for undisclosed conflicts of interest, selling homes to her relatives without disclosure. Her license had been suspended for 6 months. So, Karen wasn't new to fraud. She was a repeat offender who had only learned to hide her schemes better. Sarah began drafting a lawsuit that read like a Tom Clancy thriller. RICO charges. Mail fraud. Wire fraud. Housing discrimination. Conspiracy. Tax evasion. And at least a dozen other felonies. The damages alone climbed into 6 figures. We're not just suing for compensation, Sarah explained as she outlined strategy. We're dismantling an 8-year criminal enterprise. And we're setting a legal precedent for HOA accountability across the country. The plan was simple and brutal: present Karen with evidence of her crimes, give her one chance to settle, and if she refused, unleash federal prosecutors with the full RICO case. Walsh smiled when she heard it. I love cases where the defendant documented their own crimes. Karen's been building our case for 5 years. 3 months of digging revealed the truth in excruciating detail. Karen wasn't a nosy neighbor with too much time on her hands. She was the head of a criminal organization, one that happened to be disguised as a homeowners association. And as the pressure closed in, Karen's desperation began to spark like faulty wiring. The day after the news broke that the federal investigation was underway, a beat-up Camry appeared on my street. A man with a camera sat inside, snapping pictures of my house, and of Emma getting on the school bus. That was my breaking point. I marched straight to his car, boots crunching hard on the gravel. You want to explain why you're photographing my 16-year-old daughter? The guy rolled down his window, cigarette smoke spilling out. Just doing my job, pal. Public street, public photos. Whose job? I demanded. He smirked and drove off. But I didn't need an answer. Karen had hired herself a private investigator. By noon, that PI was knocking on neighbors' doors, asking questions about me, whether I drank too much, whether Emma looked neglected, whether strange visitors came by. Janet Bennett called me immediately. Her voice shook with outrage. Marcus, some creep was at my door, asking disgusting questions about you and Emma. I told him to get lost before I called the police. Karen's strategy was obvious. If she couldn't beat me with facts, she'd try to smear my reputation. But she had underestimated the neighborhood she had terrorized for years. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street called me next. Marcus, that investigator tried to dig up dirt. I told him you're the best neighbor we've ever had. If he comes back, my husband will have bank security escort him off the property. Carlos Martinez phoned too. That guy asked about you. I told him you fixed my breaker panel for free. Anyone messing with you is messing with the whole neighborhood. The very community Karen had spent years dividing was finally standing together. But she wasn't finished yet. The next morning, Child Protective Services knocked on my door. A kind but firm social worker stood on my porch, clipboard in hand. Mr. Hicks, we received an anonymous report. Concerns about neglect. That your daughter might be malnourished. That your home environment is unstable due to legal troubles. I invited her in, poured coffee, and led her straight to my evidence room. Walls covered in timelines. Binders of records. Court documents neatly filed. Her eyes widened. Sir, whoever reported this was either misinformed or malicious. Your home shows the opposite of neglect. It shows a devoted father fighting for his child and his rights. She closed her notepad. Case dismissed. And between us? Keep fighting. You're doing the right thing. Karen's attacks were starting to backfire spectacularly. Thursday morning brought another ambush. Someone, and we both know who, filed a complaint with the state licensing board accusing me of running an unlicensed, unsafe electrical business. When the inspector showed up, I braced myself. A tall guy with a clipboard introduced himself as Pete Kowalski, 20-year veteran. His handshake was firm, his eyes tired but sharp. He spent an hour combing through my paperwork, licenses, insurance, permits, customer references. Finally, Pete shook his head. Marcus, your file's cleaner than 90% of contractors I see. This complaint? Pure nonsense. He scribbled on his form. I'm marking this as frivolous and maliciously filed. That note goes into the record. One battle survived. But Karen wasn't done playing games. By Friday, her desperation hit peak stupidity. She tried to have my work truck towed, from my own driveway, claiming it violated HOA parking ordinances. The towing company called first. Sir, we've got a woman here demanding we remove your vehicle. You're parked legally on your own property. Do you want us to involve the police? Yes, I said firmly. Please do. 20 minutes later, Officer Janet Rodriguez arrived. No relation to David, our housing expert, but just as sharp. She listened as Karen sputtered, then calmly wrote her a citation for filing false reports and harassment. Watching Karen try to explain herself to a uniformed officer while half the neighborhood peeked from their porches was pure poetic justice. Ma'am, Officer Rodriguez said firmly, this is your third baseless complaint against Mr. Hicks in a week. I recommend you familiarize yourself with harassment laws before you dig yourself deeper. The crowd whispered, amused, as Karen stormed off. For the first time, she looked like the bully being cornered. That evening, Sarah called with an update that made my week. Karen's attorney has contacted our office 3 times today about settlement talks. They started at $10,000. Now they're offering $50,000 plus her resignation from all HOA roles. I nearly dropped the phone. 50. She's hemorrhaging money on lawyers, investigators, and now criminal defense prep. She knows the case is airtight. Sarah's chuckle carried a satisfaction I felt in my bones. The real proof of Karen's unraveling came Sunday morning. Emma spotted her driving slowly past our house at dawn, staring at the federal evidence warning signs Sarah had posted on our windows. "Dad," Emma whispered, "she looks scared." She should have been. Karen had spent 8 years making everyone else afraid. Now she was tasting her own medicine. But cornered animals are dangerous. Tuesday morning, I was sipping coffee when Officer Rodriguez knocked again, her face apologetic. "Marcus, I hate to say this, but Karen filed for a restraining order. She claims you've been stalking and threatening her. Judge Patterson wants to see you in chambers at 2. My jaw clenched. The woman who hired a PI to stalk my daughter was claiming I was stalking her. "Officer, I've got cameras covering my entire property. 8 weeks of footage proving I haven't been anywhere near Karen's house." "Save it for the judge," Rodriguez said softly. "But between us? Her story's got more holes than Swiss cheese." At court, Karen appeared with her 4th attorney in as many months. She'd ditched the power suit for conservative clothes and minimal makeup, playing the trembling victim. "Your Honor," her lawyer began, "my client has endured months of harassment from Mr. Hicks. He photographs her property, follows her to work, and makes threatening calls." Judge Patterson looked skeptical. "Do you have evidence?" "Well, Your Honor, my client feels unsafe because of his aggressive behavior and his federal investigation." Sarah Martinez rose, her briefcase snapping open like a gunshot. "Your Honor, we have comprehensive evidence proving these claims are fabricated." She handed the judge a thumb drive. Security footage. Phone logs. GPS data from Mr. Hicks's work vehicle. Witness statements. Every allegation is disproven. The judge spent 15 minutes reviewing the data while Karen shifted from pale to panicked. Finally, he looked up, unimpressed. "Ms. Whitmore, filing false police reports is itself a crime. This petition is denied, and I'm referring your complaint to the prosecutor's office for possible perjury." Karen's lawyer whispered frantically in her ear, but her case was unraveling faster than loose wiring in a storm. I left that courthouse relieved but wary. Karen was losing grip, and desperate people with nothing left to lose can be the most dangerous. That night, Emma called me at work, her voice trembling. "Dad, someone broke into the house." I dropped everything and sped home. The evidence room looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Papers scattered, photos ripped off walls, computer equipment smashed. But this wasn't random vandalism. Whoever did it wanted specific files. And they missed the backup drives I'd hidden in my closet. Plus duplicates at Sarah's office. Officer Rodriguez arrived within minutes. Her flashlight cut across the wreckage. "This wasn't a burglary," she said flatly. "This was an attempt to destroy evidence." "Any guesses who?" I didn't need to answer. Karen had just made her biggest mistake yet. Because obstruction of justice? Federal prosecutors eat that charge for breakfast. The next morning, a process server knocked on my door. He handed me a thick packet of papers, his face unreadable. KW Holdings LLC vs. Marcus Hicks. Defamation. Business interference. Damages sought, $200,000. They were claiming my accusations had harmed their real estate investments. I brought the papers straight to Sarah. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee. "Marcus, this is beautiful," she said, flipping through the complaint. Karen just admitted under oath that she owns KW Holdings. And that our investigation is hurting her business. She basically confessed to the criminal conspiracy we've been proving. How does that help us? I asked, still stunned. Because her own lawsuit is now evidence of intent. She's suing you for exposing her crimes. Federal prosecutors will eat this up. But Karen wasn't finished. That Thursday night, Emma sat at the kitchen table doing homework when the front window shattered. A brick clattered across the floor. Attached was a note scrawled in block letters. Drop the lawsuit or lose more than windows. Emma screamed. My stomach dropped. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was terrorism. I called 911, then Sarah, then Walsh. Within an hour, FBI agents were dusting the brick for prints and photographing the glass. Neighbors gathered in the street, offering support. Mrs. Patterson brought hot chocolate for Emma. Carlos Martinez offered to install security cameras the next day. Janet Bennett stood guard with a rolling pin, muttering that nobody was going to scare her community anymore. FBI agent Sarah Kim looked grim as she bagged the note. Mr. Hicks, this is witness intimidation in a federal case. That's a separate felony. Carries up to 20 years. Karen had just upgraded from HOA corruption to domestic terrorism. The very next morning, Agent Kim called with the news I'd been waiting for. We arrested Karen Whitmore at 6 a.m. Federal charges: racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, housing discrimination, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. She's facing up to 40 years. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. That night, the HOA called an emergency meeting. 7 p.m., Thursday. The timing felt like Christmas morning and Judgment Day rolled into one. Word spread faster than church gossip. By the time I pulled into the community center parking lot, cars lined the street for blocks. I saw license plates from neighboring towns. Everyone wanted a front row seat. Inside, the room buzzed with an energy I'd never felt before. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were swapping Karen horror stories like war veterans trading battle tales. Marcus. Janet waved me over, saving me a front row seat. Channel 6 is here. And the Columbus Dispatch. Even the county commissioner showed up. Sarah arrived carrying her leather briefcase, her face calm but satisfied, like a professional ready to deliver justice on stage. Photographers adjusted their lenses. The air hummed with anticipation. At exactly 7, the remaining board members filed in, looking like kids forced to face a disappointed parent. Board Secretary Helen Morrison cleared her throat, her voice shaky. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here tonight to address recent developments regarding former HOA President Karen Whitmore. The crowd went silent, except for the rapid clicks of cameras. Due to criminal charges filed by federal prosecutors, Ms. Whitmore has resigned all HOA positions effective immediately. The board extends apologies to any residents who experienced inappropriate enforcement actions. Inappropriate enforcement actions. That was the best they could manage. Even now, they couldn't say the word discrimination. That's when Sarah stood, her heels clicking across the linoleum like a countdown clock. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice cutting through the room, I am here tonight representing not just Mr. Marcus Hicks, but every family Karen Whitmore targeted these past 8 years. She opened her briefcase with deliberate precision and pulled out a settlement check that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. Karen Whitmore's criminal enterprise has been dismantled. Tonight, we announced the terms of her civil settlement. $75,000 in damages paid to Mr. Hicks for harassment, discrimination, and attempted theft of property. The crowd erupted like a dam bursting. Applause, cheers, hugs. Emma clapped so hard her palms turned red. Cameras flashed as neighbors cheered like their team had just won the Super Bowl. But Sarah wasn't done. She raised her hand for silence. In addition, Karen Whitmore is permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in the state of Ohio. KW Holdings LLC has been dissolved. All properties it acquired illegally will be sold back at fair market value under court supervision. The room thundered with cheers again. And most importantly, Sarah concluded, this case establishes a new legal precedent. From now on, no HOA board in Ohio can abuse its power for personal financial gain without facing federal prosecution. The place went silent again, not out of fear, but out of awe. I rose slowly, my boots heavy on the floor. Walking to the microphone, I looked out over the faces of neighbors who had once been too scared to meet my eyes. Now, every gaze held support. 8 months ago, I thought I was fighting one woman over some windows, I said. Tonight, I realize we were fighting for something much bigger. We proved that ordinary people can take down corruption when we document everything, stand together, and refuse to back down. The standing ovation lasted 3 straight minutes. Even the county commissioner clapped. Afterward, the Channel 6 reporter asked me, Mr. Hicks, what's your message to homeowners facing HOA abuse? I looked into the camera. Document everything. Build alliances. And remember, bullies win when you're isolated and afraid. When communities unite, corruption crumbles. The celebration spilled into the parking lot after that historic HOA meeting. Neighbors hugged, laughed, and planned the first-ever Freedom from Harassment Day festival. Carlos Martinez announced he was running for HOA president on a platform of transparency and fairness. Mrs. Patterson offered to host a legal rights workshop in her backyard. Janet Bennett beamed, her pride showing for the first time in years. But the sweetest moment came when Emma wrapped her arms around me by my truck. Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. Dad, I'm proud of you. You didn't just fight for our house. You fought for everyone. I looked around at the neighbors, people smiling instead of hiding, planning instead of fearing. Emma was right. This wasn't just about windows or fines. It was about proving that justice wasn't reserved for the wealthy or well-connected. Sometimes, it belonged to ordinary people who refused to be bullied. 6 months later, I stood in my backyard watching Emma rehearse her college application presentation. The very windows that sparked this nightmare glistened in the afternoon sunlight. The settlement money had transformed more than just my bank account. It had transformed the entire neighborhood. We used $25,000 of it to establish the Willowbrook Estates Scholarship Fund. Emma herself won a $500 award for her essay about standing up to injustice, which she put toward her pre-law program at Ohio State. Dad, listen to this part, she called, reading from her laptop. My father taught me that documentation beats intimidation, community beats corruption, and ordinary people can create extraordinary change when they refuse to stay silent. Pride surged in my chest like clean current through a newly wired system. The Playground Project, funded with another $15,000 from the settlement, opened last week with a ribbon-cutting attended by 300 residents. Kids who had grown up tiptoeing under Karen's shadow now played freely on new swings and slides, while parents planned movie nights and block parties without fear of retribution. Carlos Martinez won the HOA presidency by a landslide. His first acts as president were bold: monthly financial transparency, conflict of interest disclosures, and a bronze plaque at the community center honoring those who stood against corruption. Janet Bennett now led garden tours through her vibrant yard, proudly displaying the gnomes Karen once forced her to hide. To visitors she would say, Marcus showed us that standing up to bullies isn't just for yourself. It's for the next person who might be targeted. Another $10,000 from my settlement seeded the HOA Legal Defense Fund, which has already helped 3 families in nearby counties fight abusive boards. Sarah Martinez joked that my case had spawned a whole cottage industry in HOA accountability law. Across Ohio, attorneys now cite Hicks versus Willowbrook when battling selective enforcement. Karen's downfall became a cautionary tale. She plea-bargained to avoid trial, serving 3 years in federal prison and 5 years of supervised probation. Her real estate license was permanently revoked. KW Holdings was dissolved. All the properties she stole through manipulation were auctioned back at fair market value. The Patels even bought back their original house, the one that had sat empty since Karen's arrest. When Mr. Patel called to thank me, his voice cracked with emotion. "Marcus, we never thought we'd see justice. Thank you for fighting when we couldn't." On a larger scale, the Ohio legislature passed the HOA Transparency Act, a bill requiring disclosure of board conflicts, limiting foreclosure power, and protecting tenant rights. I testified at the signing ceremony, sitting beside the governor as he signed the law that would safeguard thousands of families from the next Karen. My electrician business tripled. Some clients just wanted the guy who beat the HOA, but most came because word spread that I believed in fixing problems instead of creating them. The annual Willowbrook Freedom Festival became a reality: live music, food trucks, booths on HOA reform, and voter registration drives organized by Emma. She had learned that civic engagement beats silent compliance every single time. My old evidence room became a sort of neighborhood museum. Families brought their kids to see the timelines and binders that had dismantled an 8-year reign of fear. This, I told them, is what happens when good people document bad behavior. But the sweetest victory was the simplest one. Last weekend, a young couple with 2 toddlers knocked on my door. They just bought the house where the Martinez family once lived in fear. "What's the neighborhood like?" they asked. For the first time in years, I could smile honestly. This is a community where people look out for each other. That's what we built from the ashes of corruption. A real community. The story spread beyond Willowbrook. The HOA Abuse Survivors website now reaches 50,000 visitors a month, sharing templates and legal guides inspired by our case. My fight had ignited others, proving one person's courage can multiply into a movement. So if you've lived through HOA harassment, tell your story in the comments. Share this video with anyone battling their own neighborhood bully. Remember, bullies rely on silence. Communities create accountability. And the sweetest revenge? Refusing to live in fear. Justice tastes better when it's shared with neighbors who become family. Looking back, it's still surreal how a simple fight over vinyl windows turned into a battle that rewired an entire community. When I first stood in front of Judge Morrison, sweating under fluorescent lights, I thought my world was about to collapse. I never imagined that fight would spark federal charges, new laws, and a movement that spread far beyond Willowbrook Estates. But that's the thing about corruption, it only wins when ordinary people give up. I didn't give up. Neither did Sarah, or Janet, or Carlos, or the dozens of neighbors who eventually stood with me. Even Emma, especially Emma, carried part of the load. My daughter, once terrified by Karen's harassment, now spoke at town halls about accountability, fairness, and justice. Watching her blossom into a confident young woman fueled by civic purpose reminded me why I fought so hard. The lesson I learned is simple: documentation beats intimidation. Every fine, every threat, every violation Karen hurled at us became bricks in the wall that trapped her. She wrote her own indictment. And the second lesson? Communities matter. Karen ruled through isolation, convincing each neighbor they were alone, that resistance was futile. But once we connected, once we realized her pattern stretched across dozens of families, the illusion shattered. Together, we weren't powerless homeowners. We were a united force that even federal prosecutors couldn't ignore. Karen's prison sentence didn't just remove a bully. It became a symbol, proof that no title, no HOA board, no abuse of power can withstand the persistence of ordinary people armed with truth. Now, when I walk through Willowbrook, I don't see fear. I see front porches decorated with lights. I see children playing without glancing over their shoulders. I see neighbors trading tools, recipes, and laughter instead of whispers about who Karen might target next. We turned a place of dread into a place of pride. The plaque at the community center sums it up best. In honor of the families who stood together against corruption, proving that dignity and unity can defeat fear. I trace those words sometimes, remembering every sleepless night, every court battle, every broken window and false accusation. And then I remember the standing ovation in that community meeting, and the way Emma's voice shook with pride when she said, "My dad fought for all of us." That's when I know it was worth every scar. So if you're watching this, and you're facing your own Karen, listen closely. Keep your receipts. Save every letter, every email, every text. Don't let them convince you you're powerless. Don't fight alone, build alliances, tell your story, seek help. Because corruption feeds on silence, but justice thrives on exposure. And if one stubborn electrician, armed with binders and a teenage daughter, can bring down a corrupt HOA president running a real estate racket, then so can you. This story isn't about me. It's about us. About communities refusing to be bullied. About ordinary people proving they are stronger than intimidation. So stand tall. Speak out. Fight back. And remember, bullies eventually trip over their own lies. All you need to do is make sure the lights are on when they fall.